I've previously talked about connections between victims. This case is all about connections. 8 women who were connected as drug users, sex workers, and police informants. 8 women who between 2005 and 2009 were murdered in the Jefferson Davis Parish of Louisiana, in and around the town of Jennings. This is their story. Hello, I am Sean and welcome to my channel. If you are returning, then it's great to see you again. Twice a week, I try to research true crime that I find interesting to tell you about it. I want to make sure that the victims are remembered, and there are a lot of victims. If you're not subscribed, please do so. It is free. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you want to support me in other ways, you can always buy me a coffee. There's a symbol and a link in the description. If you have any ideas for future crimes, please feel free to leave me a message or email me at my business email, which is in my channel information. Now, on with today's true crime. Between 2005 and 2009, 8 women had been murdered in and around the town of Jennings in Jefferson Davis Parish of Louisiana. I know I already said that, but I'm just recapping. These women have become known as the Jennings 8, or they've also been referred to as the Jeff Davis 8. Most of them were found in some state of decomposition that actually made it hard to determine the cause of death. They were found in swamps and canals throughout the parish. All these women had served as informants for the police against local drug dealers. Many of them provided information about each other prior to their deaths. Some of the victims were related, while others had lived with each other. But they all shared a common trait like poverty, mental illness, and histories of drugs and sex work. Jennings, Louisiana is in the southwestern part of the state. It is a town of about 10,000 people, and it appears to be a sleepy village in Cajun country. It has flat farmlands, dirt roads, rice fields, and crawfish ponds. But it has much more, like murder, police corruption, and scandal. So let's start talking about the victims. That's a good place to start as any. On May 20th, 2005, Loretta Sherrison Lewis, who was 28, was found floating in the Grand Maria Canal. She was found nude about 5 miles outside of Jennings. Examiners found that a large amount of cocaine and alcohol were in her system, but they couldn't determine the cause of death. It's speculated that she was killed by a Mexican migrant worker after she had allegedly robbed a group of them in town. This was per court records, but I think it was just speculation. She was married and had 2 kids. She had a history of disappearing for periods of time without contacting friends or family, and she was missing for 3 days prior to being found. She was the first in a whirlwind death that no one saw coming. But less than a month later, the second victim occurred, or the second murder occurred. On June 18th, 2005, Ernestine Marie Daniels Patterson, who was 30, was located 5 miles southwest of where Loretta was found. She was also in a drainage canal. She had drugs in her system, but her throat had been slashed. She also had wounds on her wrist, suggesting that there was a struggle or that she was fighting back. There was no evidence that a missing persons report was made, and it was unclear of how long she had been missing. She worked at Wendy's restaurant, and the same Wendy's restaurant that the seventh victim's mom worked at. So that's a connection between those two. It was also speculated that she was killed by Mexican migrant workers too. Detectives had put in an effort to tie them to her. They took fiber samples and conducted several interviews, but District Attorney Michael Cassidy said that there was a lack of evidence to continue the case. He said that there was only uncorroborated statements that he could use. But somehow in early 2006, Byron Chad Jones and Lawrence Nixon were charged with second-degree murder in connection with Ernestine. But later, those charges were dropped because they couldn't find enough evidence. And I mean, it was just basically a footnote in a couple articles that I read. So I don't have any other information. I could not find anything about those guys. Frankie Richard and Hannah Connor were questioned, but no charges were filed also. And we'll get back to them at a later time. On March 18th, 2007, Kristen Gary Lopez, who was 21, was discovered. She was found in Petit Jean's Canal, or would it be pronounced Petit Jean Canal, about 10 miles south of the town of Welsh, wearing only a sock on her left foot. She was seriously decomposed, and because of this, the cause of death could not be determined. They determined that she was only placed in this location but was killed somewhere else. She was last seen on March 6th, so 12 days prior. It took 10 days for anyone to actually even report her missing. Because of her lifestyle, people were used to her being gone for long periods of time. Her toxicology showed high levels of drugs and alcohol in her system. Her aunt described her as outgoing and well-liked. And who would she happen to have been seen with close by when she disappeared? Well, Frankie and Hannah. But nothing was connected again. In May of 2007, Tracy Chashon was arrested for accessory after the fact. She was the person who reported Kristen was missing. The investigators believe that she had already previously known where Kristen's body was when she made the report. The charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. So she reported her missing, but police think that she knew where the body was, so they charged her with that. One of the last things that I thought was interesting about this was Kristen is cousins to the seventh victims. And more to come on that. On May 12th, 2007, Whitney DuBois, who was 26, was found on the side of an intersection of Bobby Road and Earl Doohan Road, 3 miles outside of town. She was nude. There was a large amount of drugs in her system. This is an ongoing thing. They never determined cause of death, or else they just never released it publicly, which is yet another common thing. And there were no visible signs of how she died. She had been missing for a couple days, but was not reported missing. Her 5-year-old daughter never got to see her mother again. Whitney was last seen around Frankie's house in Jennings. He lived on McKinley Street, and it was in the middle of the night. It's said that she was only there briefly and left on foot. They used fingerprints to ID her. Parish Sheriff Ricky Edwards believed that she had been dead for several days and that she actually had died somewhere else before being placed on the road. He also stated that her death might be connected to the other three deaths, but he also said that he felt like he just had a serial dumper on his hands, but there was no evidence that it was the same killer. On May 29th, 2008, Laconia Muggy Brown, 23, was found alongside a road. Her throat was slit, so like one of the previous victims. She even had several cuts around her neck and behind her right ear. So either they're just really sloppy or she was fighting it off or something. They never went into it. Muggy was beginning to fear for her life prior to her death. She was telling family members this. She also divulged to her family that she had been working as an informant to the police and she was working on a murder case. She said that the officer she was working with was Michael Jannings? Jannings, I think so. Interestingly enough, she was the only victim that was found by the police. More interestingly is that she was found on the road leading to the police shooting range. One last thing that tops the cake is that she was found at 2 a.m. Why were the cops going out to the shooting range at 2 a.m.? Maybe it's a normal patrol route, but they never really said why they were out there in the middle of nowhere going to the shooting range. Whoever left her body on the gravel road knew that she would be found quickly. Her body was covered in bleach to destroy any evidence. Oh, and I said one last thing that was interesting. The most interesting thing is that she was found by Officer Michael Jannings, the same officer that she had been working with. He was the officer that found her body. That's quite interesting that he's the one who found her and he'd been working with her for a murder case. So she left behind a child and he was her 3-year-old son. So that is another parent that has been murdered. On September 11th, 2008, Crystal Shea Benoit Zeno, who was 24, was found in a wooded area by a group of hunters. She was in a dry irrigation channel. It took until November 7th, so September 11th to November 7th, for examiners to even determine it was Crystal. And of course, no cause of death was ever stated or determined or released to the public, I guess. She was so badly decomposed. I mean, it took 2 months to identify, or almost 2 months to identify the body. She had been missing since August 29th in Lake Arthur, Louisiana. She had been an employee at Sonic there, and she was just, that was the last place they saw her. She was married and had a young daughter. She knew some of the victims, including the next one. So that was just, she went missing in August and found September 11th, and then it took almost 2 months to determine who she even was. That was just terrible. On November 15th, 2008, Brittany Gary, who was 17, was found by Highway LA 1126 off of Keystone Road, 4 miles south of Roanoke. She was identified by her tattoos, but of course, no cause of death. At least it was never released to the public. But on August 21st, 2009, her aunt posted that her cause of death was asphyxiation. Uh, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what her aunt posted, so maybe they did release it to the family, or that's just what they told the family. Who knows? She went missing November 2nd. She walked from her home to the Family Dollar, but never returned home. She was actually seen on surveillance video at 5:30 buying her things and leaving the store. But what they're saying is, with the cameras, they didn't see if she was with anyone or talked to anyone or left with anyone. Um, so they think she was alone. I don't know why they had to mention that, but I think it's just to try to say maybe she was alone and met somebody after that. She was reported missing 24 hours later. She was not known for disappearing, and when she would either call them to say stuff, I'm going to be late, or she would at least answer her phone when they called looking for her. Previously to living in Jennings, the family used to live in Texas, where Brittany was doing drugs and engaging at sex work. And she's 17, remember. They returned to Jennings to hope to get her straight. Brittany and her family had some connections with some of the previously killed women. Brittany was cousins with Christine, who was the third victim, and her best friend was Muggy, the fourth victim. And I already previously said that Ernestine worked with her mother at Wendy's. Her mother stated that Brittany had expressed fears and concern about the other victims' deaths. She was scared and didn't know who she could trust. Brittany was the seventh victim and the fifth victim to be found within a 3-mile radius of each other. So, that's how tightly knit all these murders were. On November 19th, 2009, Nicole Gilroy, who was 26, was discovered by highway workers along Interstate 10. She was half dressed. She had only been reported missing hours earlier. Her cause of death has not been made, but one coroner did state that it was likely due to asphyxiation. She was murdered less than 2 weeks before her 27th birthday. She also thought that she was in danger and told her mom not to bother with a birthday cake because she didn't think she was going to be alive for her birthday. She also told her mom that the police were responsible for the other girls' deaths. She went missing on August 16th. On August 19th, her mother reported her missing at 1:30 p.m. The police forwarded the information to a multi-agency task force, and by 2 p.m. they started interviewing family. At 2:30, a call came in that a deceased female was located in a nearby Acadia parish in a small town of Egan. She was off the interstate by 150 feet. She was positively ID'd that day, so miraculously, she was found right away, but she was in a different parish, like the neighboring parish. And even though she was found in a different parish, they still connected her to the other 7 women because there were so many similarities. Now, there's so many ins and outs of this case. Kristen was present when the police killed a drug dealer by the name of Leonard Crotchet in 2005. So that might have been, working as the informant because of that. Now, some people say that the police were involved in the women's deaths, and you'll hear that repeatedly. From what they knew about the killings of Leonard, it's said that he was unarmed, and even though there was a grand jury, no charges were ever found. But they did have a couple different trials trying to figure things out with that. A task force was formed in 2008 to deal with the killings. It consisted of different state, federal, local, and even FBI. They found many implications that some law enforcement were involved in the killings, but never followed. Some some accusations were pointed straight to the sheriff office chief criminal investigator Warren Geary. In 2009, the sheriffs had each investigator working on the case swabbed for DNA. There were so many accusations against the investigators that he wanted to cover his own behind. But the office never commented on what the results were, so it's still up in the air. There have been other suspects that were tied to this case that were not police officers. Frankie Richard was a local owner of a strip club and suspected drug dealer. He admitted to having sex with most of the victims. He was one of the last people to see Kristen alive. 2 female inmates stated that some sheriff's office officials had discarded evidence to protect Richard. So there might have been things implicating him, and some officers decided to toss away the evidence, supposedly. Byron Chad Jones and Lawrence Nixon, who was coincidentally a cousin to Muggy, were both charged in the murder of Ernestine, but the sheriff's office failed to test the crime scene until 15 months after her death. They found that it failed to demonstrate the presence of blood. Really, after 15 months, they couldn't, find blood? They didn't think after 15 months that it might have been cleaned and cleaned and cleaned and all traces of blood would be gone? Never know. David Berry was pointed at as a suspect by many of the witnesses. He was a member of the sheriff's office. He was described as driving around with his wife looking for sex workers. Then they would take them home, they would drug them and have sex with them in their sex room. He was only interviewed once by the task force before his death in 2010. I couldn't for the life of me find what his cause of death was, if it was or anything. I just found that he died, and that I see notations that he died, and that's pretty much it. So I don't know what happened, if he was murdered or self-inflicted or anything like that. So after the formation of the task force, Sheriff Edwards finally stated that he thought that the women's deaths were possibly the work of a common offender. So after 8 deaths, then he finally said it could be possibly the same person. But here it is, 15 years later, and still no convictions. Author and investigative reporter Ethan Brown has revealed how this case has been plagued with missteps in the sheriff's office and missing evidence that just disappeared. He wrote a book called Murder in the Bayou: Who Killed the Women Known as the Jeff Davis 8. I have not read this book, but I've heard that it's an excellent collection of details and thoughts about this case. A lot of the information that I've read and used for this have been gathered, bits and clips from that. Plus some podcasts I've listened to, they had read this and stated some of these details. That's where I'm getting it. So I do thank him for some of the information that I've got. Other interesting facts about this case. In 2007, Sergeant Jesse Ewing had information from 2 female inmates about knowledge about the killings. Only 4 had died at this time, and he didn't trust. He's an officer, but he does not trust his colleagues. So he turned the tapes over to a PI who then, in fact, turned it over to the FBI. And then the FBI turned it over to the task force of peers that Ewing didn't trust. Now, because of this, and I don't understand how or why, because I couldn't find any of that detail, Ewing was charged with sexual misconduct and malfeasance of the information and was fired. The tapes were never released, but rumors stated that local law enforcement were somehow involved, which it keeps coming back to local law enforcement. I found a couple things about this, but I couldn't get the pure facts. But allegedly, in the 90s, multiple officers were involved in or charged with drug trafficking. Also, the Jeff Davis Parish has around 20 unsolved homicides, counting these 8. Remember, this is a town of about 10,000 people, and it has such a large number of murders that are unsolved. Only interesting thing that happens in small town community. Other interesting things that happen in this small community is that Officer Phil Carmen opened fire on several officers. He had already killed 4 people, one of which was an officer, and he went to jail and died in jail, I believe. 8 female officers had filed sexual harassment lawsuits against their male colleagues. The police chief, or a police chief, sorry, I don't know which one, I just saw that it's a police chief, was accused of stealing $4,500 in cash, 1,800 pills, more than 380 grams of cocaine, and several pounds of marijuana from the evidence room. Brown learned in his investigations that Louisiana Congressman Charles Bustani had allegedly had sex with 3 of the 8 women. Allegedly, he owned a motel where the girls worked at their sex trade, and allegedly had sex with 3 of these women. Allegedly. And I'm saying allegedly because it never was proven, but this is something that Brown had found. So many issues in just a sparsely populated area. So, the Jeff Davis 8 murders still are unsolved. Will they ever be solved? I don't know. There's so much corruption and everything, it seems like, in this area that it's hard to find out. It should not matter that these women were sex workers or struggling with drug addiction. It should not matter if they were poorer than other people. It should not matter. They're still human beings. Their lives matter. Just because the police department used them as informants and discarded them like trash doesn't mean that they didn't mean something else to somebody else, or that they didn't mean anything to somebody else. It does not mean that they're worthless. I just want to say that I can't believe the crap that went on in this small community. You know, I've lived in many small communities, and I've seen corrupt cops. I've witnessed flagrant disregard for the law, but never this many wrongdoings in such a short amount of time. It's police like this that give other officers a bad name. They always talk about the thin blue line. Well, it doesn't always mean that you can break the rules. You've been sworn to uphold the law, and there's seriously something wrong in that area. And I'm not accusing all the cops, but some of them got to know something that's going on. And when you get that badge, you're sworn in to uphold the law. And I've known officers that followed that pretty well. Side note, and I'm sorry, I didn't want to do this, but I'm going to. I lived in a small town of about 800 people, and they had, the sheriff's office that came in there. And they hired on a new officer who would sit outside of the bars every Friday and Saturday night and watch for the drunkest people coming out, pull them over, and give them DUIs. Well, the mayor of that town was pulled over by him and given a DUI because he was extremely drunk. The mayor and the city, since the city, the little community, they hired the sheriff to protect them, or not to protect them, but to police their town. And they threatened to revoke that and just hire themselves their own police force and get rid of the sheriffs out of there if they did not fire this officer, and the officer was fired for it just because he busted the mayor. That's the kind of corruption that I'm talking about. Or some officers that I've seen that bust parties that minors are at and send them all home, but then take the alcohol over to their buddy's house and drink it. It's harmless, but it's still not right. So it's cops like that that give the rest of the cops that are actually good cops a bad name. So maybe I'm reading too much into this, or maybe not all those cops are innocent. I don't know. I doubt they're all innocent. I hope that they get a break and find out who the killer or the killers are. Give some closure to these ladies and their family. So I've babbled long enough. I apologize. Thank you if you're still here, thank you for watching. If you're not subscribed, please do so. Be good to yourself. Be good to others. Love you all. I'll see you next time. Bye.